leaders, I hope you guys are having a great week this week. As we wrapped up our Stepping Up series, I've heard countless stories of opportunities where our teenagers have actually stepped up and done some big things or challenged the way that they are currently living their lives so they can be step-up kind of people. So I thank you for those conversations that you've led in your small groups. Now we're kicking off a brand new series this Sunday called In Other Words, and it's a little bit of a word study, so we're changing gears from a typical sermon series like we've done for the past few months, taking a little bit of a different approach to what we're talking about for the next couple of weeks. I think it'll be really interesting as we learn some of the Christian lingo that we use as part of the church. But we're also, for our small group leaders, doing the 7 non-negotiable characteristics of spiritual leaders. We're talking about one each week, so if you missed one, you can go back in YouTube and see the first 3 weeks from the past 3 weeks before this video. But this week we're in week 4 of those 7 non-negotiables, and the 4th characteristic is courage. I don't think the tag leader should be put on anyone who hasn't had to make some tough decisions on a consistent basis. Even as a small group leader, you'll have to make tough decisions when it comes to your students, their desires, their families, their safety, not to mention the pressure of being one of the key spiritual influences in a teenager's life. Now, I once heard Andy Stanley say that a leader isn't necessarily the first person to see an opportunity, but they're the first person to act on what they see. And that's so true. There are lots and lots of people who see what's wrong with the world or the church or student ministry, but however, there are very few people that are actually willing to do anything about it. Leaders step up and make the hard calls, even when it's unpopular. Now, on a side note, courage is not the absence of fear. There have been so many situations in my leadership journey personally that I've just about caused me to bail on the whole leadership thing entirely. However, courage is knowing what God has called you to do and then doing it. Not necessarily knowing the outcome, but knowing who is in control of the outcome. Now that's my prayer for myself, and that's my prayer for you as spiritual leaders in our students' lives, that we can know who's in control of the outcome and have courage as we make tough decisions from time to time. Now this week we kick off a brand new series called In Other Words. I'm excited about this series because it takes a look at some of the specific words we use in our Christian language. Have you ever heard of the word lexicon? I have a lexicon, you have a lexicon. Actually, everyone on the planet has a lexicon. The word lexicon actually describes a person's vocabulary. In other words, your lexicon is the words you use day in and day out. Generations have lexicons as well. For example, in the 1950s, 1960s, words like groovy and far out were in a lot of people's lexicons. Now today, our lexicon includes words like Instagram or dope or selfie or stick or sick, profile pic, legit. Those are all words that if somebody in the 1960s heard any of those, they'd have no idea what they meant. Our lexicon is almost entirely different from what people used 50 years ago. We say and use these words and phrases so much that we don't really think about them. And sometimes, I know I'm guilty of this, we use words without completely knowing what they mean. Take the word literally, for example. People say things like, I was literally dying of boredom. No, dying of boredom isn't a thing. Or our students say, my sister is literally the most annoying person in the world. Probably not. Or how about I'm literally about to starve to death? No, I would hope not. And the word literally gets used so much in our language. And I don't think everybody knows what it means. If they did, they would literally die of embarrassment. See what I did there? It's kind of a funny, but the point is, we use words all the time without understanding what they mean. In one place this happens a lot is the church. There are a lot of churchy God words, and people who go to church use them all the time. If you come to church a lot, you may not even realize it, but if you're new to church, you hear these words and you think, are they speaking a different language? What are they even talking about? Salvation is one of those words. Some people use another version of saved. Maybe you've heard someone say Jesus saves or are you saved? In the church, it's often used to describe the moment someone says a prayer and asks Jesus to save them, to be their Savior. We talk about that moment when we got saved, and it's almost like magic, right? Poof, our sin is gone and we're saved. But there's a problem with that, isn't there? The problem is that everyone who does that, everyone who prays a prayer or makes a commitment and gets saved from their sins, they still sin. You've seen this over and over again. Maybe you've seen Christians who talk about how they've experienced salvation, but their lives haven't changed much. So you've decided salvation must not be a real thing. Or maybe for others of our students, they decide to become a Christian and they thought the whole sin thing would go away, and you've been frustrated ever since because no matter how hard you try, we just keep sinning. Which makes you wonder if the whole prayer thing even worked for the salvation in the first place. It's confusing, isn't it? We think, is this really what Jesus wanted when he came to earth and died? Was it really so that we could pray a single prayer or make a one-time commitment that doesn't really stop me from being mean to my mom or saying terrible things about people or thinking twisted thoughts? Have you ever wondered if maybe we've misunderstood that word altogether? That we aren't really sure what the word salvation means? What if the way we see salvation is different than what what Jesus intended, and we're missing out on something much bigger than we could ever imagine? Now, the Apostle Paul had some great insights into what salvation actually means. Paul is considered one of the most important figures in early Christianity, and when he talked about salvation, people listened. One of those churches was in the city of Philippi. In a letter to that church, Paul says something that resolves a lot of the tension we feel about the word salvation. Paul says, "Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed me, not in my presence, but much more now in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you and will act in order to fulfill his good purpose." Did you catch that? Continue to work out your salvation. Continue. That would be a strange way to talk about salvation if it was supposed to be a one-time prayer. That's because according to Paul, salvation just isn't one moment. In other words, Paul says salvation is more than a prayer that qualifies you for heaven. Salvation is more than something that happened when you were a kid. It's more than what happened to you last summer when we went to summer camp. Paul says that salvation is something you continue to work out today, tomorrow, for the rest of our lives. But not because you have to be good enough to have a relationship with God, and not because your prayer for salvation didn't take. Paul's saying this: salvation is an ongoing relationship, not a one-time prayer. It's a relationship, a partnership to fulfill God's good purpose. Now let's be clear. The moment still matters. The moment you make the commitment and the decision to give your life to God, the moment you trust Jesus as the one who made a way for you to know God, you're in God's family. You are tied to God forever. But to walk away from that moment and not engage in a long-lasting relationship with God would be missing the point of salvation. When we receive salvation, does it mean we're never going to sin again? No. But it does mean that we can ask God's help to confront our sinful nature. In other words, once you're saved, sin does something to you. So when you sin, it's going to hurt. It's maybe not at first, but eventually sometimes we feel guilty, or you'll feel another churchy word, convicted. But instead of drowning out that feeling, instead of hating ourselves or giving in, salvation saves us. It takes us away from the power that sin has in our lives. Because salvation says that what we do does not define who we are is now defined by what Jesus did on the cross for us. Salvation says, hey, turn away from that way of life, free yourself from the hurt, guilt, shame that comes with sin. You're forgiven. Now go and make better decisions next time. And just like God rescued you through salvation when you initially trusted him, God continues to offer himself as the one to rescue you. That's the gospel. See, when Paul talks about us working out our salvation, he's talking about this idea of healing. God wants us to be healed from the effects of sin so that we can be who God intends for us to be. That's God's good purpose and his good will for our lives. He wants us to be healed and made whole, and that takes time. The salvation we continue to work out is about a healing that keeps on going. It's a healing from the shame when we make a wrong choice. It's a healing from the distance sin creates between us and God. It's so much more than a one-time prayer. Salvation is growing into who Jesus said we are and learning to let our life look like what Jesus said it could be. Maybe your students have never thought about the word salvation before, maybe at all. And if that's the case, I invite you to talk to them as their leader here at church about it. You can make the decision today, your students can make the decision today to follow Jesus, and then that process of allowing God to heal them is a lifelong journey, and you as a small group leader may just be part of that process. So salvation is something we work out over our entire lives. It's not just a one-time thing. And God works with us and works through the people in our lives so that we can learn more about salvation every single day. I hope you guys have a great week. We're going to have great conversation about this Sunday night. And we'll see you here at 4 o'clock for our small group leader meeting. We've got some great training stuff prepared for you guys this week. It's our longer meeting this Sunday. So 4 o'clock here at the Anona campus, we've got some great stuff for you. If you're out with Omar at 360 United, he'll be meeting with you guys beforehand to pray as well. But thank you for what you do. Have a great week. We'll see you later. Bye.